When I got out of high school, I enrolled in college thinking it would just be a continuation of what I was used to. But during my first semester, I realized I couldn't handle it. I don't know if I just couldn't handle the new freedom or what. I didn't have my parents breathing down my neck, and I just would never get my assignments done. Then I started getting into other bad things, and that didn't help. I was living in Alaska, and I decided I needed a total change of scenery. I just kind of looked at a map and picked out Arizona as probably the complete opposite environment from what I was used to. I moved down there and looked for a job. After going through a few dead-end things like fast food worker and amusement park attendant, I decided to apprentice under a plumber. Sometimes the work was disgusting, but it paid well. I hadn't had any money my whole life. After I got better at it, I would do side work on my own as long as it was within my skill level. One day my boss said he was sending me out to this job that was about 100 miles away from Phoenix where I was living. I was kind of surprised because most of the jobs were local and I could always call on my boss if I needed him. But I went down there to test myself out. It was this old run-down cabin that some lady had just bought. It had old lead pipes that needed replacing, and she wanted me to make sure all the drains were working and stuff. It sounded like something I could handle. I stopped by where she was staying and she gave me the keys. By that time it was evening, but I decided to go ahead and head over and work through the night. I got there around 8 p.m. and set up my generator and floodlights on the exterior and got to work running some pipe for a hose spigot. I was alone and wearing my headphones listening to some music. After prepping the outside of the cabin, I went to my truck to get some pipe. When I turned around, I saw something move out of the corner of my eye. The area outside of the floodlight's range was pitch black. I took my headphones off to look and listen, but I couldn't see or hear anything. I shrugged it off, thinking my mind was just playing tricks on me. After a few minutes, I put my headphones back on and got back to work. I was busy screwing some pipe brackets to the wall. Then during a song transition, I heard something strange. I could swear I heard this clicking, hissing sound. I shot upright and placed my back against the wall. I still couldn't see what was making the noise, and I couldn't even really tell where it was coming from. There are snakes in the area, so I was pretty terrified. But I was pretty sure that snakes aren't nocturnal. But we didn't have snakes in Alaska, so I wasn't totally sure. I stood there really still, and after about 30 seconds it stopped. I got back to work without my headphones on, and then I heard the sound again. I hated not knowing what it was. I kind of shimmied along the wall until I got to a tree growing in the yard. I climbed up it so I would have some kind of vantage point. I didn't know if snakes climbed trees. I was really ignorant on the whole subject of snakes. I got myself situated on a branch and swung my head light around the yard. There was a low fence around the lady's yard, maybe 4 feet high. On the other side, there were all kinds of things growing, like cactus and yuccas and shrubs. It was really thick over there, so anything could have been hiding there. Then I saw movement, and I was horrified to see these 2 glowing yellow eyes looking at me. Something looked like it was crouched down right on the other side of the fence. My heart was already pounding, but then the freaking thing stood up. It looked taller than me, and I'm 6 feet tall. It had black claws that were gripping the fence. They were huge. I could even see its sharp teeth. It looked like some kind of giant lizard. But it stood on 2 legs, so it almost seemed like it could be partly human. I don't know why I say that, but it gave me a feeling of some kind of humanoid. It had an evil presence. I was pretty sure it could get to me in the tree. My truck was parked in the yard about 30 feet away from me. My keys were in it. I decided to take a chance. I jumped down from the branch and ran. About halfway there, the hissing started again. I sprinted the other 15 or so feet and slammed the door and laid on my horn trying to scare whatever it was off. I looked over and couldn't tell at all if it was still there. I moved my truck to face the spot and turned on my headlights. It wasn't there anymore, but I had no idea which direction it had gone. There was no way I wanted to leave my tools there, so I pretty much just sat in my truck until morning. The next day I collected all my stuff and got the hell out of there. I tried to explain to my boss why I had to abandon the job. He wasn't happy with me at all, but he didn't fire me. He decided to give me another chance since I'd been doing good work up until that point. but holy crap, I've never been so scared in my life. I've always been sensitive to things that others can't see or hear. My mom used to think I was just making up stories to scare my siblings, but I wasn't. Growing up, we all had chores. We were a big family. I was the oldest of 6 kids. It was just normal to have chores, and being cranky about doing them was pretty typical too. This particular night, though, nothing was typical. I was washing dishes, minding my own business. Everyone else was in bed, which was pretty normal. I wasn't able to do my chores until after the kids went to sleep because so much of my time was spent helping with them. I kept hearing heavy footsteps behind me, which I tried to ignore. I knew that it wasn't anything that I could control, so I ignored them. Even though I had a pit in my stomach, I just kept working. I was so used to the strange and unexplainable happening that I refused to let it faze me anymore. I had told my mom about the weirdness several times before, but she just blew me off. She would tell me I had a vivid imagination. But that night, things changed. The footsteps had started to get heavier. Whatever was making them was angry, but I still refused to turn around. Soon the footsteps were right behind me, and I was struggling to ignore them. I knew they were there. I knew it was angry. It didn't like being ignored. I continued to focus on the last few dishes I had. I was close to being done and able to head to bed myself. As I rinsed the last pan, all of the cabinet doors flew open. I gasped and jumped, spinning around and searching the room for anything that could have caused it. Of course, there was nothing there, except my mom in her doorway, glaring at me. I quickly explained that it was not me and closed the cabinets, apologizing for the noise. She sighed and sat down in the recliner. Apparently, she was going to watch me finish my chores because of the noise. I had just started wiping down the countertops when the footsteps started again, racing back and forth behind me, getting louder with each pass. I looked over at my mom, who looked incredibly confused. She whispered, "What on?" But before she could finish her thought, every cabinet door flew open and every drawer slammed open. I yelped and jumped away from the sink, shaking as I tried to calm down. I had dealt with the footsteps for months, but this was the first time it had ever gotten physical with anything substantial, and I didn't know what to expect. Even though I was scared, I closed all of the cabinets and the drawers, hoping that this was the last of the activity for the night. But as soon as I stepped back to the sink to rinse the rag in my hand, the drawers flew open and dumped all over the floor. This time I screamed. The knife drawer was closest to the sink and narrowly missed my bare feet. My mom jumped up and ran into the kitchen. She was obviously shaken. We didn't speak as we started to put the kitchen back together. I don't think there were words for what we were feeling. I knew that she hadn't believed me, but how could she deny what she witnessed with her own eyes? As we finished putting the last of the silverware back in the drawer and the drawer back in its track, I asked, "Do you believe me now?" She just nodded and wiped her hands on her pants. I let her know I would finish up and she could go on to bed. No need for us to both be terrified. No sooner did my mom shut her bedroom door and the footsteps started again. But this time I spun around and asked, "What do you want? Why are you messing with me?" Of course, I didn't expect a response. It just made me feel better to say it out loud. What I didn't count on was seeing a figure standing there. He was about 6 foot tall, had on an old business suit, like the ones you see in the old westerns, and a top hat. He was there, but he wasn't, if that makes sense. I could see him, but I could also see the table through him. He only looked at me a moment before he started pacing again. I couldn't move. I just watched him as he paced back and forth. I wasn't sure what to do, but I didn't want to draw any more attention to myself. It was only a few minutes before he just disappeared. 1 second he was there, and the next he was gone. That was the only time I ever saw the man, but I heard his footsteps every night until we moved. At some point, they became just a normal part of my night. I never ignored him again, though. When I would hear him start pacing, I would always say hello. I knew that he could mess with physical objects, but he never did again. I'm not sure if that is because I acknowledged him or if he just didn't find the answer he thought he would by scaring me. I still can't believe what I saw all these years later. And sometimes I still wonder if I dreamed it up. I hope that if you read this, someone can relate and will let me know that they believe me. Because even though my mom helped me, she never once talked to me about it. So I have been left knowing this happened, but not knowing how much of my memory is exaggerated. I know it sounds crazy. I really do, but I needed someone else to hear my story and possibly understand. I had nothing against squirrels until they started coming in my house. They've always been annoying, but we pretty much let each other be. I live a bit south of Trenton in New Jersey, near Mount Holly. I assume squirrels are a problem everywhere. I don't know though, because I've always lived in this area, and I haven't done much traveling. I started noticing how many squirrels were in my backyard last Halloween. I'd gotten some pumpkins that were going to be jack-o'-lanterns. I'd put them outside until I was ready to carve them. Right away, they started getting chewed up and were ruined. Before long, the squirrels had whittled them down to nothing. I was outside looking around and saw that the big tree from the neighbor's house was growing right toward my roof. That made it really easy for squirrels to scamper around on top of my house. I didn't think much of it, though, and I figured it was a lesson learned to not leave your pumpkins outside. Anyway, about a week after Halloween, I was chilling in my house one night and heard this horrible screeching sound outside. I looked out my back window, but I couldn't see anything. My back porch light is broken. It's not just the light bulb, it's something electrical, so I didn't know how to fix it. The noise was so loud and creepy. I was really starting to wonder why I was attracting all this wildlife. I couldn't imagine what could make that screeching sound. I put it out of my mind and went to bed. But the next morning when I woke up, I was hearing some really odd thumping noises. I thought it was my neighbor working outside. But then I heard a crash outside my bedroom door. I rushed out and saw one of my wooden carvings laying on the floor. I heard a bunch of shuffling in the bathroom and headed back there, and to my horror, a squirrel was staring back at me. I couldn't figure out what had happened. The only thing I could assume was that it had gotten down the chimney somehow. I screamed and it ran away from me and crawled into my undersink bathroom cabinet. I was really freaked out and didn't know what to do. It wouldn't come out for anything. I left the back door open, which was really close to the bathroom. I assumed it would just automatically sense the fresh air and run out. But no dice. I played squirrel sounds for it on my phone, thinking that would entice it to come out. But nothing worked. Then I ordered a squirrel trap on Amazon to be overnighted to me. I read that squirrels love apples and peanut butter. I crammed the squirrel trap into my tiny bathroom and set it with the food inside. But the bastard managed to get the apple out without springing the trap. Then it went back into the cabinet and just hung out there. It lived in that cabinet for 72 hours before I was finally able to trap it and relocate it. It was traumatizing, but I was glad it was over. Until 3 days later when it happened again. I woke up to another one of those jerks in my house. This time I had secured the door of the bathroom, so if it happened again, a squirrel couldn't hide out in there. I managed to get it out the back door. But it was really unprecedented to have such an unlikely thing happen again. I should mention that I'd still been hearing that screeching sound several days in a row. I started wondering if there was a connection. That night I was sitting on my couch minding my own business. I'd been hearing the screeching intermittently. Then I heard this little scurrying sound and I looked toward my kitchen and saw this mouse just running along the baseboards. I've lived in this house for over 10 years without so much as an ant coming in. I felt surrounded and really creeped out. I got back on Amazon and ordered mouse traps. I got my flashlight and opened the back door to see if I could tell where that sound was coming from. Even before I turned on the flashlight, I saw something big crouched on the top of my back fence. The worst part was, it was looking at me. Its eyes were yellow and glowing. We had just come off of Halloween, so the impression I got was something like a goblin. I didn't even want to, but I turned on my flashlight. It was even worse than I expected. It had this elongated skeletal face, like a horse or a dragon. It had scaly skin. As soon as I had turned on the flashlight, it had risen up from its crouched position, and I could see that it had wings. It was terrifying to think that it might fly at me. I should have never gone to the woods late at night. I regret what I saw. I can't get anyone else to believe me when I tell this story, so I'm hoping I can reach someone that went through something similar. I live in the infamous town called Salem in Massachusetts. Almost all of us have heard of the Salem witch trials. In fact, that's what my town is known for. I wish my story involved witches instead. It would be a lot easier for me and more believable. Anyways, now that you get an idea where I live, let me tell you what happened on the night of July 13th, a few years ago. I decided to go out with a few of my friends and we drank. We were in the middle of the woods just having fun, having a nice bonfire and everything going. I think it was around 1 or 2 in the morning when we all decided we were going to pack up and stumble back home. The ones who were less drunk were buddied up with the really drunk ones to make sure everyone got back home safely. Well, I was one of the people who didn't have as much to drink as the rest, and my house was only a few blocks away from the entrance of the woods we were in. So I was fine walking by myself. As I was following the trail to the entrance of the woods, I saw something staring at me behind a tree. I thought it was one of my buddies that decided it would be funny to prank me, so I played along and pretended to be scared. I thought I heard them say something, but then I looked more closely at them, and I realized I did not know who was in front of me. The eyes were popping out of their sockets almost, the mouth was curled into a malicious smile, and I could see something popping out of its head. This was not anywhere near Halloween, so I do not know why someone would have any sort of costume on at this time of year. I just stood there and froze. I didn't know what to do. Whoever it was behind the tree started to come out, and before I got a better look, I made a break for it and ran. I don't know where I was running to, but I ended up at the entrance to the woods. I stumbled into a few friends of mine that were also making their way to their houses and helping the wasted ones up to their doors. I didn't want to run into whatever that was in the woods earlier, so I just made my way home and into my bed. When I got in bed, I was thinking if I was just seeing things because I was drunk. The more I thought about it, the more I realized I wasn't even that drunk. Sure, I was lightheaded, but I was still able to talk to my friends, and I was able to walk somewhat without stumbling too much. I was clear-minded. When I went to sleep, though, the weirdest thing happened to me. I dreamt I was still in the woods in front of the thing I saw earlier. But this time I wasn't able to move. It slowly stepped out from behind the tree and walked towards me. It didn't talk, but I thought I could hear it say something in my head. I just heard the word suffer over and over again. It was in a deeper voice, but yet it felt like it was screaming at me. I felt like my head was going to explode with how the thing talked. It looked human except for whatever it was on top of its head. I woke up after it was face to face with me, and it opened its mouth. That morning I started texting my buddies who were probably experiencing hangovers if any of them saw me in the woods and decided to play a prank on me. The really drunk ones didn't remember, but their walking buddy had both of them accounted for. No one else knew what I was talking about. I asked my parents if they could have any idea what was going on, and they chalked it up to me being drunk and not to worry so much about it. That was 3 months ago. I still see the person or thing or whatever it is in my dreams. I dreamt I woke up before with it in my bedroom doorway, and it started hissing at me while smiling. I started having strange marks on my arms and my body about 2 months ago. I don't own any animals, mind you, and I stopped drinking since. No one believes me, not even my family. They think I am self-inflicting these wounds on me, and when I tell them I'm not, they just don't believe me. No matter what I tell anyone, they just think that I am drunk when I text or call them, and that I am just trying to scare them. I keep having these dreams or whatever it is, and then I wake up with a cut or even a bruise on some part of my body. Wherever the thing marked me, I woke up with it. It's to the point where I have been threatened to be institutionalized if I don't knock it off with self-harming or my crazy stories. I never had a history of any mental illnesses or self-harm in the past, but no one believes me. What do you think it is? Am I going insane, or was I not supposed to run into whatever it was in the woods? I'm afraid to close my eyes at this point, and I just need someone to believe me. Someone to save me from whatever is going on. My grandfather had something really strange happen to him when he was 7 years old. He was playing in the backyard and was suddenly overwhelmed by the smell of rotting garbage or something decomposing. He decided to investigate and started poking around at the edge of the woods that bordered the yard. Grandpa moved branches and foliage with a long stick, but he didn't see anything out of the ordinary. Both of his parents had told him many times not to go into the woods alone. But the smell got stronger, and curiosity pushed him into the trees. He stepped carefully, sure that he was close to a dead raccoon or possum, and not wanting to step on it. Grandpa kept going, and in just a few minutes came to a small clearing that he did not recognize. The smell of rotten garbage was so thick that he was nearly choking, but that wasn't the weirdest part. Directly in the middle of the clearing was something that definitely did not belong. When he told me the story, he described it as a silver Rubik's Cube, and it was 4 or 5 stories high. The outside was covered in what Grandpa's 7-year-old brain identified as armor of some kind that glowed a bit where the sunlight was hitting it. It was completely smooth, and there was a walkway of some kind leading down to the ground. Standing at the bottom of the walkway were 2 figures that looked mostly human, except for their weird clothing and elongated heads. It looked like they had been waiting for him. Once they spotted him looking at them, they started beckoning at him, waving him closer with hands that only had 3 long fingers. They were wearing what looked like what my grandfather identified as work clothes, some kind of overall or jumpsuit that looked like they were made out of the same material as rain boots. They were taller than Grandpa, but definitely not giants. Grandpa couldn't help himself. He started walking toward them. He said that it felt like an invisible rope was pulling him closer, step by step. He wasn't afraid at all, just insanely curious about what was inside that shiny cube. By now, he had decided that these figures must be aliens. He'd seen them in his older brother's science fiction magazines, and he knew that they came from the far reaches of the galaxy. But his older brother had told them that the stories were all made up. Grandpa couldn't wait to tell him about this. Before he knew it, he was up the walkway and inside the ship. There was 1 alien on either side of him, but they weren't touching him. It was bright inside, but he couldn't see any wires or light bulbs. It was like the walls in the long hallway were lit from within. It seemed to stretch out for miles on either side and seemed to be much bigger on the inside than it appeared from the outside. The trio started walking down the hallway. The aliens were chattering away to each other in a series of chirps and clicking sounds, but Grandpa didn't think they were trying to talk to him. He did take a moment to wonder why he wasn't scared. A year earlier, a little boy had disappeared from the small town where my grandfather's family lived, so he'd received many lectures about avoiding strangers and the danger of going off with someone he didn't know. He knew that this wasn't what his parents had in mind during those conversations, but who could have possibly imagined this? Grandpa didn't see any stairs or doors on their long walk. He wanted to see the place where the aliens flew the ship. He also didn't see anything that hinted toward the cause of the rotten smell, so realized it must be coming from the aliens themselves. The taller alien finally stopped in front of a portion of the wall that looked exactly like the rest to my grandfather's eyes. He reached inside of his jumpsuit and pulled out a card, which he waved in front of the wall. It slid open, and that is when Grandpa started to get a bit nervous. It looked like a doctor's office with a table in the middle of the large room. There were some machines clustered around the table, but more alarmingly, there were 8 more aliens standing there. They stood in a line, with their hands clasped in front of their bodies. The 2 accompanying my grandfather each grabbed one of his little arms, but they didn't have to drag him to the table because his feet were still moving under some other power. He walked right to the table and then stepped up on the little stool that seemed to be there for just that purpose. Grandpa sat on the edge of the table, his legs dangling over the side. What was going to happen? Would they hurt him? Would they take him back to their planet? Would he ever see his family again? One of the aliens approached, chirping softly. It slowly reached out a hand and patted my grandfather on the head, and then it pulled a giant pair of scissors out of nowhere. My grandfather finally started yelling, and that was the last thing that he remembered. When he woke up, he was lying in his own backyard, just a few yards from the porch. He could hear my grandmother yelling in the house, saying that it was time for everyone to get up for the day. It was chilly, and his head felt really cold. He ran his hands over his body, but nothing hurt or seemed out of place. Grandpa reached a hand up to his scalp and found that his hair was completely cut away in some places. And that was where the story ended. When I asked him what happened next, he just said, "I got in trouble for cutting my own hair." He never told his parents about any of it because he didn't want to get yelled at for going into the woods alone.